I feel like I'm in the hot seat. I am in the hot seat. Very good.
I'll start the questioning by just, from your standpoint, representing the diocese, just tell us the next step. After Cannon Cooter comes, then what process?
Yes. So the question for those that didn't hear it is, what does the process look like in terms of moving from here through the calling of your next rector? And so I can share a little bit about that. So as you heard in the announcement time, we've been able to identify some supply help, very part-time, to help just get us through this next immediate phase. And so Father Noel Daugherty, who I know is a friend to some in the congregation, who's been connected here over many years in a number of different ways, in his retirement is available to help 2 Sundays a month. What he said to me was, anything more than 2 Sundays a month, and it doesn't feel like retirement anymore, which is a fair point. So Father Noel will be available for this short term, 2 Sundays a month, and I was just thrilled to hear through Dan that you all have been able to put together a worship team. You're kind of taking ownership and you've put together a worship team so that you can offer morning prayer those Sundays that you don't have some clergy help, including even some homilies. So I think that's terrific. It's wonderful to hear some other voices in our homilies from time to time. So that's the short term, is that Father Noel will be with you twice a month. We don't know how long that will be, and then you all will help cover things yourselves. In terms of non-worship things that come up, really that's the sort of thing where you would look to your leadership here within the parish. So Dan in particular, and the vestry team are in place to help with particular decisions that are needed, and the bishop's office stands ready if there are particular questions that come up that need some guidance. Certainly we can help. One of the nice things that's come out of this process is you've got my phone number, so you know how to reach me, which I'm very glad for. So that's the short term. So things will happen with the worship, the combination of you all and Father Noel, and other decisions will be made by your elected representatives of the parish, your lay leaders, in consultation as needed with the bishop's office. Then, so on Wednesday, Canon Eric arrives and has his first day as canon to the ordinary. And one of the things at the top of his list will be for us to find you all someone who can be an interim priest. So somebody who can be around more often than, hopefully more often than just the Sunday worship, but somebody who can also help you with other things, with kind of pastoral care needs and teaching and leadership and other things during the week. So that's the goal, if we can, is to find somebody who can be an interim, who can walk with you. That person would not be your permanent person most likely, but would be for that interim period as you're searching. And so we're getting to work on that already. We're beginning to gather some names, and then Canon Eric will take over that process, and we'll work that certainly not in isolation, but in very close communication with you all, because we want to be sure that even for that interim period, we've got somebody who's a good fit for you, and that's very important. Every congregation is a little bit different. Then that, of course, will give us some time to begin the search for the next permanent rector here. And there are a variety of different ways to do that. One of the ways to do that is to, throw open a national search and see what names come in. Another way to do that is to have a somewhat more targeted search, what's sometimes called a search for a priest in charge. And so that would be a scenario where we would work together to identify perhaps 3 really top quality candidates that then could come and meet with your representatives, and you all could decide if it seems like it has the potential to be a match. Now, there's some advantages both ways. Really, the decision of whether you all want to do a more targeted search that starts with a kind of list of 3 finalists right off the bat with help from the diocese, or whether you want to throw things wide open and have a longer process that involves many more names that get vetted. That's a decision that's really up to you all, and particularly up to your vestry to decide how you want to proceed. But as the bishop's office, we'll be ready for either eventuality. So we've had a little bit of conversation that perhaps the targeted search may be a little better. It's a lot quicker, for one thing, to do a targeted search. You get someone here sooner. And there are also some ways to have a targeted search that gives you a priest in charge that you can kind of be with for a while to see if it's a good fit. The nice thing about the priest in charge, I probably shouldn't say this since it's on the internet, but it's a little bit of a rent-to-own scenario sometimes with a priest in charge, where you get to have someone in and see if it's a good fit for everybody involved. And then if it isn't, you say, okay, that was really an extended interim. And if it is a good fit, you say, great, let's make it work. So anyway, point being that we've got short-term with you all and with Father Noel. Then we're going to try and find you an interim who can be with you as this search process happens. And then the search process will begin at that point in either the more targeted way or the broader net. And so I think that's the sort of basics of how this will go. And at every step along the way, certainly Canon Eric and myself will both be very involved working with Dan, with your vestry, to be sure that we get the very best fit for you. And so that's a very collaborative process is what I have in mind with all of this. I really want to be sure that all of our congregations have just the right leadership for what you need. So we'd set that as our goal to work on that together. Does that make sense? Good. So that's the big question I know today. But you may have other things in mind, like what my children's favorite food is, or I'm glad to talk about whatever you want to talk about. Yes. Yeah. So my wife, Megan, who is a music teacher, does definitely want to continue to teach music here. And I think the hope that she has is that she'll be able to do some music teaching in person with students here in Oklahoma once we get to the point where things like that can happen again. So Megan has done some teaching in schools and some teaching privately and with group lessons. And I think part of what she likes about the individual and the group lessons is that she controls her own calendar, which is kind of nice. So I doubt at this point that Megan will take a full-time school job, because I've just got so much going on myself. And although I imagine our children who are 11, 9, and 6 would really like to have hours and hours at home with no parents, my guess is that that's probably not a good idea. Yeah, so Megan will certainly start to add some in-person students, individuals, and groups when it's safe to do that kind of thing. And in the meanwhile, she's going to be continuing to do, I think, some of these remote virtual lessons with folks. And those remote lessons may start to happen with folks who are from here, too. So Megan's main instrument of training was the tuba. She trained at at the Yale School of Music in the tuba. But actually, these days, she mostly teaches piano. And so she has a fantastic method that she's studied that enables her to teach piano to all ages. And she loves doing that. So I imagine there'll be a lot of piano lessons happening virtually, and then eventually in person. Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
How many other parishes in the Diocese of Oklahoma are now searching for a permanent priest?
That's a good question. The list is not terribly long, in part because Canon Michael Durning, who was our canon to the ordinary, who has just retired and returned home to Florida to be a granddad, did a marvelous job of kind of working through as many as possible. And so, I'd say there are probably 6 or 7 at various stages of search. Some are at the very, very beginning. Some are at the very end and have finalists who are visiting already at this point. So I think about 6 or 7 at various stages. So really, that's pretty good. And so the nice part about that is that as I learn my job, and as Canon Eric learns his, we'll be able to really give, I think, some good attention to the various places like yourselves that are open. I've been saying that the way I'm thinking about it right now, I think I bring, with 18 years of ordained ministry experience and experience in a cathedral and in several churches and at a school, I think I know about half of what I need to know to be your bishop. The other half, I'm learning. It's a very different type of ministry. And there's really no way to be fully ready for it. So I'm learning. Now, Canon Eric will also be learning, but in a way, he's got less learning to do than I do, because he's been a rector at a church in Florida, in Naples. But before that, he served for 5 years on a bishop's staff in Southwest Florida. And part of his ministry there was to work with parishes in transition with leadership. So actually, a lot of the work that he will be doing here, he's done already. So he's probably got about 20% to learn. I've got about 50% to learn. So I'm delighted with that about Eric, that he brings a lot of experience into the situation. And also Canon Michael, even though he's retired, he's promised me and he's promised Eric that he will take our calls. So if he sees a 405, he's not just going to hang up. He's going to answer it if he sees it. So yes, so the canon to the ordinary, and for those who don't know, a canon to the ordinary is basically sort of the right-hand person for the bishop. So this is someone who's usually involved with helping to get clergy into vacancies and working with congregations in that process, working with the ordination process of folks who go through, but also sort of being a real counselor. I mean, you might think of it in terms of politics as somebody like a chief of staff, almost. And so that's the role that he will play. And we actually had the search that led us to Canon Eric. That began before I even left my parish in Phoenix, my church and school where I was the rector. The search for the canon to the ordinary, because we knew Michael was retiring. Michael was actually supposed to retire at the end of April. He gave us an extra month until the end of May, thanks be to God, with all the delays and COVID and my consecration being pushed back a bit. But we began searching for Eric even before I left my former parish. And we had a national search and had lots of wonderful candidates. And he ended up being just the right personality with just the right experience to, I think, be terrific. I think you'll really like him.
I have unless somebody else has, oh, I'm sorry.
Yes, we'll do one out
Can
here.
I just make one quick comment that came in through the chat? Can you hear me, by the way? Yeah, came in through chat. Father Bob Gates says, If you mention your favorite food, you'll get that at every parish visitation. Careful.
Yes. Yes, I've been warned about that. Never mention your favorite food and never mention your favorite hymn. You'll get your favorite food and your favorite hymn until you're tired of them. So I'll never tell. Yes. Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, it's been difficult. It's certainly not what I imagined. So, for those who maybe didn't have a chance to see the videos of the walkabouts, those sorts of things, my big mission for being your bishop was all about and is all about being with our congregations on the ground. So that is really what drew me here. The idea of being, in some ways, a kind of old-fashioned bishop, a bishop who would be around the diocese a lot, who would be very closely working with our clergy, our lay leaders, our congregations. That doesn't mean there aren't interesting things that happen sometimes outside of our diocese, but really my focus is here with all of you. And especially with young kids at home, the idea of a lot of travel outside of the diocese isn't particularly appealing. So it's been a challenge not to be able to do as much in terms of getting to know folks. And so probably like all of you, it's been a lot of time on Zoom. I feel like I'm kind of zoomed out at the moment, but it's been a very valuable tool. So we've been having a Zoom clergy call, Bishop Ed and I, every Wednesday. And so that's been one of the ways that I've been getting to know the clergy is through this Zoom call every week. We kind of check in with everybody, see how they're doing. In addition to that, I've extended to the clergy an invitation to set up individual time with me. And so I've been having lots and lots of phone conversations and Zooms with clergy, just, with no agenda other than to get to know each other better. And so that's been fun. My calendar's been filling up with lots and lots of phone calls and Zooms with clergy. The real challenge has been with lay people. And so we don't have a similar kind of Zoom gathering for our lay folks. And so I'm trying to start to think about all of that. I'm getting to know the clergy, I think, pretty well, but how do I get to know our wonderful lay folks in this period where we can't get out? So what we've said is that we're not going to do actual in-person visitations until at least after Labor Day. This pandemic is just too unpredictable, and we don't want to do something like confirmations where you've got all these people close in together and you've got to lay on hands and all of that. We don't want to be the beginning of people getting sick because they came together for a confirmation. So those in-person visits, we'll see where we are with the pandemic as of Labor Day, and we'll make some decisions there. I have an idea about all this in terms of getting to know. And it's a very tentative idea. It's not a public announcement. But what I'm thinking at the moment is that I may begin after Labor Day with our very smallest churches, with the fewest people, because it's easier to social distance, of course, if you're, a congregation of 10. So that's how we may begin after Labor Day. We may begin with really our very smallest places, the places that are 8 and 10 people, really socially distanced, and then kind of work our way up to the medium size and then larger places. Health and safety obviously is the number one priority in all of this. I'm going to be here a long time, and so we'll have a lot of opportunity to get to know each other. I don't want to jeopardize anybody's safety by pushing it too hard. But I also really welcome your ideas. So if you have thoughts about how we can get to know each other better. I did do something really fun last week. There was a congregation in Enid, and they do a virtual happy hour, and apparently they've done it for a long time on Friday nights. And so they invited me to join their virtual happy hour, which I did, and it was great fun. So I'm really happy to accept invitations. Now, see, it wasn't even an actual drink. It was, I think a bottle of water. But I'm very glad to accept invitations for virtual gatherings with our lay folks. If there are things that happen, whether it's a vestry meeting or a social gathering over Zoom, I'm delighted to do those sorts of things. So we'll get there. Yes. Sure. It's a great question. So the question is, with the priest in charge model, how happy have people generally been with that? So, of course, my experience in this diocese is new. I've only been here a couple months, but I know about this model from lots of other dioceses, including Arizona, where I was serving before here. And I'll tell you that, in general, my sense of it is that people have been very happy, by and large, with the priest in charge model. Now, of course, it requires a certain degree of letting go, because you've got to say, okay, well, what if we don't like any of the three? Or what if there's somebody fantastic out there, and if we took, 30 applications, somebody might not rise to the surface immediately, but eventually they... but in general, I find that most of the time people are very happy with it for several reasons. One, it's just a lot faster. You can get through that process much more quickly. You all, it's not been that long since you did some really in-depth work looking for your last rector. And that's one of the advantages, actually, of your scenario, that Father Steve left perhaps a little sooner than expected. You've still got a lot of really relevant information and data that can be useful. So it can be a lot faster. But also, really, if we work well together, my sense is that we could come up with, say, 3 really good candidates, potentially. And of course, if you don't like any of the 3, there's no requirement that it's got to be one of the 3. You can do, what is it in the SAT is like none of the above, So it's not like we'd have to say, okay, well, if you don't like one of these 3, then forget it. So that's my sense, is that this is personal opinion here, as a very new bishop. I think sometimes our search processes take way too long. I've never understood that about the Episcopal Church. Sometimes they'll take, 18 months or 2 years. We hire university presidents and football coaches and all kinds of other important people in far less time than that. So my sort of general sense is that I don't understand why it always needs to take so long. Now, if there's been conflict or difficulty or things to work through, maybe. But in a sort of ordinary situation, I don't know why we can't move it along a bit, is my sense. Yes. So it's interesting. I can tell you, with the places in our diocese that are very far along in search processes, we've been able to do a kind of hybrid model. So certainly a lot of the initial conversation has been online with Zoom and so forth. But for the final stages, in some of our congregations, we've still been able to do some in-person. Now, we haven't done the visiting their place, but in at least one situation I can think of, we've been bringing finalists to us. And we've just been very careful about it. And everybody's been masked up and keeping their social distance. You know, the Zoom stuff is great. Sometimes there's no substitute for the in-person, even if it's in-person behind a mask. So it's my feeling that we could probably find some ways to bring the finalists here to have some in-person. Because, you know, this isn't just a job interview, it really is discernment. The Holy Spirit is involved. And I think it's not that the Holy Spirit can't work through Zoom. Holy Spirit can work through anything. But I think it is often helpful to be able to have that interpersonal connection. So I think we'd work together to see if there weren't ways we could do that while keeping everybody safe. Of course, it depends on how the virus cooperates or doesn't. But yeah, if I were on a vestry, I wouldn't want to call somebody to be my priest in charge or rector without having had some time in person, face to face with them. That would be my feeling. And I think there are probably ways to do that. Yes. Yeah, it's a great question. So there's some different ways to get at it, but the most common model is that the person selected as the priest in charge would come, and then after a period of time, say a year, everybody would sit down and say, do we want to make this permanent? So the congregation would have a chance to say, okay, we've had a year with you. Yes, we'd like to continue, or maybe not. But also the priest in charge would have a chance to say, I've had a year with you all, and yes, I'd really like to continue, or no. So we'd work out the details, but that's the sort of typical model, is that you come and after about a year or so, okay, is this working? Is it not working? If it's not working, no problem. You know, if either one of the parties decides it's not working, you know, we can look at some other options. But if it is, then you'd say, okay, then we'll remove the priest in charge label and you become our rector, with all of the kind of longevity that we hope for with that. Yeah. Good. Anything else? No favorite food, no favorite hymn. That's good. I'm not going to tell you. I'm not going to tell you. But I will tell you what a beautiful solo that was today. Oh my goodness. What a beautiful voice. Spectacular. Yes, sir.
Episcopal Church membership numbers have been declining for many years. What are your thoughts on the growth model for the future?
That's a great question. Yeah, the real easy stuff, right? Yeah. Well, it's true. The Episcopal Church and really all of the major denominations in American Christianity have been in decline since about the 1970s. Now, I was born in 1970, but I don't blame myself for any of that I know. This has been happening for about the last 50 years. We've had this pattern of decline in all of the mainline churches. So, you know, the Lutherans, the Methodists, even the Roman Catholics haven't declined as much, but have stayed very steady. And that's mostly because of immigration, and also birth rate helps with that too. So this is a problem that we all face in common. And even really large and strong denominations like the Southern Baptist Church, as an example, have been struggling in recent years with things like this. So what we're seeing is probably a once in a 500-year period reformation of the church. So if you know your church history, about every 500 years, there's some major reformation. Things really get shaken up in some way. And that seems to be what's happening right now. We're having a major shakeup. And what's interesting to me about the pandemic, my guess is that when we get to the end of this pandemic, it will have accelerated trends that were already in place. That's my guess. We'll see. Now, my hope is that everybody who's gotten used to perhaps enjoying church remotely will come back in person. You know, I don't know. We'll see what the effect is. You know, it's hard when you get out of a habit to get back into the habit. And so we'll see. What I'm very committed to in this diocese, and that's really my role is here, what I'm committed to is using the resources of the bishop's office to work with every single congregation to grow in all of the ways that are possible in each place. And see, that's very different. If there were one solution to this, everybody would be doing it. The challenge is that it's really different every place. So what I envision is that the folks who are on my staff and I would really work very closely with each of our congregations to think about what's the growth strategy for you? What's the growth strategy for St. Luke's? And that involves lots of things, like looking at the neighborhood, for one. Okay, what's going on in our area? What are the challenges? What are the opportunities for us here? There are some techniques and some trainings and things we can bring. I mean, you know, there's basic training that can be done about communications, about evangelism, about welcome, how we make people feel welcome. So there's certain basics. But I think what I want to see us do is I want to see us work together in each situation to come up with a strategy for growth. Now, growth isn't just the number of people attending. So you can be the most amazing, just fantastic, spirit-filled, prayer-filled church community in the world. And if you're in a town that, for example, is really declining in numbers because businesses are leaving, it can be very difficult to grow your church numerically if you're just in an environment where that's really hard. And that's the case with some of our congregations. Some of them are just in areas where there just aren't that many people who might be interested in what we have to offer. But my guess is that for most of our places, there are strategies we can come up with together. So that's how I think we do it. I think it's not a one-size-fits-all. It's not a, here's your brochure on church growth, and if you do these 5 things, everything will be filled up. I think it has a lot to do with a different strategy in a way for every place. And it has a lot to do with leadership. So in addition to getting the right clergy leadership, which is critical, I mean, you can't really have any kind of growth, spiritual or otherwise, without good clergy leadership. So it's that right person as priest in charge and rector. But also, what I'm really excited about is that we're going to be expanding our Iona training for lay people. So we have this fantastic Iona school that helps us to train currently our deacons and our bivocational priests, those priests who have another job during the day. What we're going to be doing is expanding the Iona training to add material and courses for lay leaders. Because one of the things we know for sure in every environment is if you've got the right clergy person, and if you got a really well-trained and energized group of lay leaders, that's the essential beginning for any kind of growth. So that's my commitment. I mean, can we as the Diocese of Oklahoma undo 50 years. I don't know. But I think what we can do is work with every single congregation to be spiritually vital, to be reaching out to our communities, engaging our neighbors, and to be the type of place that if someone comes, if we invite them and they worship with us, they really want to come back. I think we can do that. I think we can work on that.
I have a question from
Yes.
chat. Darian asks, are the candidates you look at to be a priest in charge from the Diocese of Oklahoma, or do they come from all over?
Good question. I think both. They certainly could, and I think I would imagine some of them would come from outside of our diocese. They don't need to come from inside the diocese. So, it'd be the three best candidates. And, it might be that one of them or two might be from our diocese if they're the best fit. But no, we would cast our net, even though it's a targeted search, we would still cast our net nationally to say, okay, let's find the three best folks who might be a good fit for St. Luke's, wherever they come from, whether it's Oklahoma or beyond. But a priest in charge model doesn't restrict us only to candidates from within our diocese. And having been here in your beautiful church today, which is amazing, having met some of you and seen how friendly you are, my sense is that this is a very attractive place to come. I enjoyed my drive up this morning from Oklahoma City. I enjoyed what I saw of Bartlesville, and I read a little bit about some of the history of Bartlesville in anticipation of being with you. To me, this is a very attractive place. I think you're a wonderful church in a really interesting community. I think it's going to be appealing to folks. Well, we'll see how this bishop thing goes. If the bishop thing doesn't go so well, I may be available. Exactly. The nice thing, it was like with my former parish, the nice thing about having 3 kids is that your children's program grows dynamically. So, no. Well, I saw it was nice to see some young people here today. That was great. Anything else? Of course. Yeah, that's a great question. My sense, we haven't made any decision about Sunday school on the diocesan level, but my guess is that we will follow very closely what happens in our schools. So, as our public schools and our other schools make their decisions about what to do, I think that's going to be a really good indicator. And so, if our local public school, wherever we are, opens up and things are going okay and people are, it's hard to get kids to wear their masks, but if we do some of that and things seem to be safe, my guess is that may open the possibility up of Sunday school with some good precautions and things. But what we know about this virus is it's very unpredictable. And so most of the schools that I know of are making plans. So they're going to start in person, but they're making plans in case they have to go virtual at some point. So it may end up being the same with our Sunday schools, that we may be able to start in person. If things spike, we may have to pull back. But if we can keep our kids safe in our schools, my guess is that we can probably keep our kids safe in our churches as well. But that's not an announcement. That's just my sense of it. Well, what I imagine is that it will be both. So what we've done with the reopening for worship is that we said, after a certain date, you may reopen if you can follow these guidelines and if you feel ready to do it. But what Bishop Ed and I have also said is that no church has to reopen. So we've got a lot of churches across our diocese that aren't open yet. And some of them may not open for some time. So that part, no one has to reopen just because you can. My guess is that if we extended some flexibility for Sunday school, and I don't know if we will, but if we did, still it would be up to each individual congregation to say, okay, we're allowed to do this if we follow these protocols, but are we ready? Are we ready? And it's a perfectly legitimate decision to say, no, not quite yet. That's more stress than we can handle. So my guess is that's how we'll go. But we'll see. I think we'll learn a lot from the school systems as they start to reopen about how this is going to work. We'll see. Yes.
One last question.
Yes.
Comment. How do you see the future of the Episcopal Church in the area of the social and political realm? We have an identity there, I think. Do you see that changing in any way or focused on any particular area?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. So I'm a lifelong Episcopalian. I grew up in the Episcopal Church in Virginia. And even just over my lifetime, I've seen the kind of political affiliations of the Episcopal Church change quite a bit. So when I was a kid growing up, I remember the joke, in Virginia at least, and I think in other places, that the Episcopal Church was the Republican Party at prayer. Obviously things have moved quite a bit and evolved over time. Some might say that in some places it's more like the Democratic Party at prayer. For me, the most important thing is that the Episcopal Church be welcoming to everybody of all political persuasions and backgrounds. That's what's most important to me. Because, there may be some areas where something that we believe in as Christian people connects with some particular political decision or an issue. But in my experience, the gospel of Jesus doesn't line up very well on one particular side of the political spectrum or the other. To me, I think it's kind of a mix. So my priority is, let's be sure that in the Diocese of Oklahoma, our Episcopal churches really welcome everybody. And it doesn't matter if you're left, right, or in the middle, you feel welcome here. And that will certainly be my perspective as bishop. The parish and school that I came from in Phoenix was hugely mixed politically. And I loved that. I loved that we had people who were on very different sides of the political spectrum who would sit together at church and were best friends. And they would kind of tease each other, but they'd get along. So now that doesn't mean that there may occasionally be matters of public interest where I feel like our faith compels me to say something, but I'm not a very partisan person. I'm really kind of an in-the-middle type of person politically. And so I think what you can expect from me is that I will always try to represent a view that brings us together as much as possible. And I think that's one of the gifts of our Episcopal Church. There are not many places today in this world where you can get together with folks who believe very different things. We're getting to a point where, increasingly we get our news only from the people that we agree with. We like to spend time online, especially, only with those who agree with us. Our churches, I think at their best, are very different. They're a wonderful mix of people. So I think what we can focus on is, where is the gospel calling us in ways that we can work together? There's actually a lot we can do together across whatever divisions we may have outside of these walls. So that's my focus.
been great speaking for the congregation and vestry and all the listening and watching. We really, really appreciate it. You're always welcome, as you know, and we look forward to working with Canon Tudor and you and the rest of the staff as we move through the process, but this is a great first step, and we feel confident, I think, that we are on the right track. So, appreciate it so much.
It has been my pleasure to be with you. You will always be the church that I visited first. And it's been a wonderful visit. And so I thank you for the hospitality and the opportunity to be together. Know that for this transition phase that's coming, we're going to be right there with you. You've got great vestry leadership. We're going to be right alongside those great leaders. And we're going to work really hard to find just the right fit for you, someone who will both comfort and challenge, as Jesus did. So God bless you and stay safe.